From a cop who was planting drugs on innocent citizens to one who murdered an innocent child, these are dirty cops who couldn't handle what was coming. First, we take a trip down to Jackson City, Florida, where things got seriously intriguing. At the center of it all is former Sheriff's Deputy Zachary Wester, a man who found himself facing 67 counts of racketeering, fabricating evidence, false imprisonment, and possession of controlled substances. In short, this guy was accused of making a side hustle out of planting drugs during random traffic stops. Wester's alleged scheme involved a dozen drivers, innocent folks pulled over only to find themselves suddenly under arrest for drugs they swore weren't theirs. Naturally, this raised a few eyebrows back at the station. After some internal head-scratching, Wester was suspended in 2018. Fast forward 3 years, and the case finally made its way to trial. Wester, ever defiant, pleaded not guilty to everything.
This is a case about an abuse of an incredible power, about the abuse of the incredible trust that we have to put in law enforcement in a society.
They relied on body cam footage, the kind of evidence that doesn't lie, unless it mysteriously vanishes. Enter Stephen Van, a convicted felon who'd just been released from jail when Wester conveniently discovered meth in his car. Like many others, Van had given Wester permission to search his vehicle, confident he had nothing to hide. Little did he know he had everything to lose. And to make things even fishier, not all the body cam footage survived. Some recordings suspiciously missing. But what did stick around would prove to be Wester's downfall. Teresa Odom, another unlucky motorist. Wester was all smiles and small talk when he pulled her over, joking about bombs and hand grenades. But as he started his search, the camera caught something curious. Wester slipping on gloves with a tiny item already tucked in his hand. Moments later, he triumphantly found a small bag of meth in Odom's car. When questioned, Odom's response was simple. "That is not mine. No, sir." And no, she had never seen that suspicious plastic baggie before.
Now, the white small plastic baggie that was in that spoon that the deputy just showed you on this video, had you ever seen that before?
No, sir.
Was that in your car?
No, sir.
The prosecution's theory was that Wester was eager to climb the career ladder, aiming for a spot in narcotics, and fast. For his part, Wester maintained his innocence, denying that he planted any drugs.
Any drugs?
After 5 days in court and numerous witnesses, it was up to the jury to decide Wester's fate. If found guilty, he could be spending the rest of his life in prison. 7 hours of deliberation later, the verdict was in.
In the state of Florida versus Zachary Tyler Wester, we the jury find as follows as to the counts charged and the information. Count 1, guilty of racketeering as charged.
The clerk went on to read the verdicts on all 67 charges.
Count 7, guilty of official misconduct as charged.
In total, the crooked officer was found guilty on 19 charges.
Count 9, guilty of official misconduct as charged. Count 10, guilty of official misconduct as charged.
On count after count, Wester was found guilty, 19 charges in total. Among them, misconduct in the arrests of Van and Odom. Justice was delivered. But the story doesn't end there. 11 of the 12 drivers he'd wronged went on to file civil lawsuits. As for Wester, he was sentenced to 12.5 years behind bars in July 2021. More than enough time to think about just how wrong that career move really was.
Your Honor, I beg you. I've never been in trouble. I'm not.
It was a cold day in January when Brian Parks, a former East Cleveland police officer, found himself on the wrong side of the law. He stood in court, awaiting sentencing for a decision that had cost him his badge and his freedom. 6 months in prison was his fate for using a taser on a handcuffed man and trying to cover up the incident by falsifying police reports from that fateful October 2021 night. It all started with a routine traffic stop. Parks had attempted to pull over a driver for speeding and having tinted windows. But the driver, Mario Garcia, didn't stop. What followed was a high-speed chase that ended in a crash. The incident quickly escalated when Parks, instead of simply arresting Garcia, struck him with his patrol car and used his taser, twice, after the man was already handcuffed. As if that wasn't enough, Parks slammed Garcia into the police car and closed the door on his leg. The courtroom grew tense as Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Gregory Mussman summed it up.
We have here, Your Honor,
Parks had already pleaded guilty to assault and attempted tampering with records, and now the moment of reckoning had arrived. Prosecutors played the body camera footage, showing the brutal assault, and Parks, stoic and expressionless, stared straight ahead. For Garcia, the man on the receiving end of that brutality, watching the footage was harrowing. But he stood before the court, and with unexpected grace, he told Parks,
It happened.
I forgive you. I'm telling you I forgive you.
Still, Garcia made one thing clear. He wanted Parks to pay for what he'd done. He should be held to a higher standard, he told the judge. When it was his turn to speak, Parks offered an explanation.
It was dark, it was cold, and he fled from the police. We were in a corner alley. I couldn't see anything.
But prosecutors say Parks tried covering up what he did, claiming in reports Garcia was handcuffed after he was tased.
His attorney, Allison Hibbard, took it a step further, pointing to the trauma Parks had endured on the job. She explained that Parks had struggled since a 2019 incident where he shot and killed a man while on duty. The post-traumatic stress disorder, she argued, had clouded his judgment, leading him down this dark path. Despite the plea for leniency, Parks had already agreed to give up his police officer license as part of his deal. And now, after hearing his sentence, this former officer broke down, tears streaming as he begged for mercy.
Your Honor, I beg you. I've never been in trouble. I'm not gonna...
Judge Collier Williams, though firm, granted Parks a small reprieve. She allowed him to remain free under electronic monitoring until February 1st, when he would report to begin his sentence.
You don't know the pain that you have caused.
John Camfield had spent years on the other side of the courtroom, testifying in DUI cases as a law enforcement officer. But in 2018, the tables turned, and this time he wasn't the one bringing the charges. He was the one facing them. It all started with a tragic crash in Poinciana. Camfield, drunk behind the wheel, slammed into a group of kids who had just stepped off their school bus. The scene was devastating. After hitting the children, he sped away and crashed into another vehicle down the road. One of the children, 13-year-old Jaheim Robertson, never made it home. His injuries were too severe, and he passed away. When Camfield's case went to trial, his defense team brought in a parade of character witnesses, all painting the same picture of a good man. They described him as a dedicated father and the kind of guy who always stood up for what was right. But no amount of praise could undo what happened that day.
in court.
My son was mowed down and killed by John Camfield, an ex-cop who chose to drink your sorrows away, and then get behind the wheel.
On the day of the crash, Camfield's blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit, yet he insisted that alcohol wasn't to blame for the tragedy. Instead, he claimed he'd had a medical emergency, a blackout, that caused him to lose control of his vehicle.
Blackout.
I had no way of controlling the events that occurred on April 27th. I had not been...
For Jaheim's mother, Robin Robertson, no explanation could lessen her grief. When it was her turn to speak, her heartbreak and fury filled the room. "I waited for him and waited for him, and he never came home," she said. "You took that from me. You took that away from my family." The judge, perhaps moved by the family's pain, delivered a harsh sentence. Camfield was sentenced to prison, possibly for the rest of his life. In Breckinridge County, Kentucky, the courtroom was tense. It wasn't often that the defendant standing before the judge was someone who used to be in charge of law enforcement. But today, Todd Pate, the former sheriff of Breckinridge County, was on the other side of the law. His charges were serious: assault, driving under the influence. His second offense, criminal mischief, and leaving the scene of an accident. At 51, Pate was in court to change his plea from not guilty to guilty, a decision that would spare him the possibility of a 15-year sentence. Instead, he'd serve just 75 days in jail, as agreed in a plea deal. All he had to do was make it official by saying the words to Judge Janet Crocker. "Is it your desire to change your plea from not guilty to guilty?" Judge Crocker asked, the formality of the moment hanging in the air. But instead of a simple yes or no, Pate hesitated.
At this time, is it your desire to change your plea from not guilty to guilty?
Do I have to answer that yes or no, or can I make somewhat of a statement?
That is a yes or no answer, sir.
As Pate continued to waver, the judge turned to the prosecution.
Why am I wasting your time,
Mr. Chambers, what is the Commonwealth's position at this time, sir?
Your Honor, we would move to revoke the defendant's bond. We took part in a lengthy mediation. We agreed to continue this case 2 months to enter this plea today. I think we've inconvenienced the entire court system by canceling a pretrial date and continuing this matter for 2 months for him to resign from office. So we move to revoke the bond.
Mr. Vowles, would you like some additional opportunity to meet with your client this afternoon before we proceed at this time?
I don't believe it'd do any harm. I'll make it very, very quick. I know we've already delayed the court, and I'll report.
The prosecutor, equally tired of the back and forth, made his position clear. He was ready to revoke Pate's bond. After a brief recess, Pate returned, still uncertain. He asked again for a chance to speak, clearly struggling.
Yes, I had every intention of coming in here today and entering a guilty plea. Based on the mediation that we had, it's very difficult for me to enter a guilty plea to felony-related charges. That I've been in law enforcement for 25 years, and never have I ever charged someone with felony charges on a situation pertaining to this.
Pate was especially bothered by the assault charge. He felt it had been added unfairly, perhaps because of his position as sheriff.
You'll do, but I feel like I'm being very much bullied into doing something that's not right. Now, the gamble is big. Mr. Chambers wants to go to trial and say, now let me tell you this, that, and the other, then I'm risking leaving my family, which I did that March 8th when I drank and drove. Thank God I didn't kill anybody. But I want this court to know, I want the people to know, and I want the public to know that Todd Pate holds himself responsible for everything that he did.
By this point, Judge Crocker had heard enough. She cut to the chase. Is it your intention today to enter this guilty plea? Her tone made it clear. She was done with the back and forth.
Is it your intention today to enter this guilty plea? And I think we're at a yes or no place at that point.
Can I say one more thing? I think everybody in this room wants out, but I don't want you to try to send me to the penitentiary for years and years. You can sleep with it, I can sleep with it.
Okay.
And this is probably
I think
unusual,
we're done.
but
At
let's
this
do
point
it.
in time, I think we're done.
At this point, I think we're done, she said, before ruling to revoke Pate's bond. He was going to jail that day. Despite his earlier objections, Pate eventually accepted the plea deal. 75 days in the county jail, with credit for time served. It was a far cry from the authority he once held, now reduced to a man grappling with the consequences of his own actions. Love courtroom drama and real-life justice? Then hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you're always up to date with our latest videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.